In today's video, we will talk about local variables and global variables. In the last video, we covered functions in great detail. So if you don't understand these things, first watch that video, then come back. So here I have three functions. One is our main method, and as you know, functions are called methods. So this is our main method, and these are our custom defined methods which we have created. Uh, Also, let's talk about variables. So variable is basically a named memory location. So there are two types of variables: local variables and global variables. So we have used local variables before. So every variable we have used so far in our programming journey, it was a local variable. A global variable is something different. Before we go towards the global variable, let's try to understand what a local variable is. So local variable is the type of function variable which is local to a function. So as the name states, it is local to a method in which it is declared. So let's check this example. Here I have declared two variables called int num and fact. Now they are local to this function only. Since they are declared in main method, therefore they are only accessible in this method. You can use these variables in this method, like you can give it a value or you can use it in other calculations. So for example, here I am using these variables. So local variables are used only in a function in which they are declared or defined. So uh, this variable won't be accessible in other functions. So let's try accessing this fact variable into some other function. Let's come into this function and let's assign it a value. So as you can see, we are getting an error. It is not. It can't be resolved to any variable as our compiler is telling us. So to use fact here, we need to redeclare it. Now this is a fact variable, but it is only limited to this method. So similarly, variables defined in this method can't be accessed in main method. For example, here we have a variable called f, right? Let's try to access it into our main method. As you can see, we are getting an error here. It is telling us that variable can't be resolved to a type. We can once again create a new variable in this method. So basically, what I'm trying to say is that variables which are only accessible in a single method are called local variables. So every variable declared inside a method is called a local variable. So this is how local variables work. So let's suppose this method contains a ton of variables like string, text, char, ch. So it has these variables, right? And let's call this method. So I have called this method. Let's pass it for. Okay. So let's look here. As soon as our program will run, it will come to the main function. It will execute all these statements, and then it will call this method. So as soon as this method is called, it will first assign this value to the parameter. It will create a new variable called num, and it will assign this value to this variable. I have commented it here as well. Like you can think of it like this. This is a statement which will be executed by default since it is the parameter of the function. So first it will create this variable, then it will create these three variables, then it will complete its for loop, and then it will return the value of f. So as soon as the value is returned, this function will exit. It will come back into the main and it will execute the next statement, whatever it is, right? And as soon as it comes back, this method will be destroyed from the memory. So this method and all its variables, uh, which are these, will be removed, will be popped off the stack. It will no longer be available into our program. So this is how local variables work. Um, so now let's talk about global variables. Suppose you want to use a variable in every function. You want to use it into main, you want to use it into factorial, you want to use into this method. So to exchange variables, one strategy is to use the return statement. For example, I needed the factorial here for my calculations, right? For my further calculations. That's why I returned the value of f. So one possible solution is returning the value. But if it's not possible, if you want to return something else, then you can create global variables. So to create global variables, you simply have to go to the top where your class starts above the main method. You have to write first static. That's a keyword, uh, which means it can be accessed without creating an object of the class. Then you have to assign it the data type. For example, let's create an integer int. Then you have to name it, like call it my num. Then you can give it a value. So as you can see, now we have a global variable. So global variables can be accessed into the whole program. So that's the advantage of global variables. Their lifetime lasts as long as the program is running. This variable will exist in our memory. So that's how global variables work. They don't die as soon as the function is uh, exits. They are alive as long as the program is running. So for this global variable will be accessible in whole program. Let's try giving it a value, for example here. So as you can see, now it is 14. Similarly, you can add stuff into it, like we can do this or we can increment it. You can do all type of stuff with it. We can even pass this variable to the factorial function. So as you can see, now we are passing it to the factorial function. Similarly, let's try here. So as you can see, it is accessible here as well. You can also add it into another variable. Like you can do all type of stuff which you normally do, but this time the variable is global. It doesn't have to be limited to a single method. It can be accessed in the whole program. So that's one example of how we think of global variables. Uh, let's I want to show you more stuff, like let's let's work this out. Let's run an actual program which will use our global variables. Let's in our exercises we will see the scenarios when we must have to use global variables. For example, we can use it for checking cases. For example, let's create a boolean variable. Let's we remember we can create as many global variable as we want. For example, this is one global variable. I can create another. Simply do the same stuff. Let's set it to boolean, call it flag, and let's set it to true. So also you don't have to give it a value. You can just declare it like this. So it will work out fine. So suppose we have a global variable which is 0, and we are tasked with returning the factorial from this number, and then we have to print it into this method. So suppose you want to print the factorial of the number into this method. So let's see how we can do that. One thing is you can use you can either return this value into this method, you can call this method into this method, or you can you can see how global variables work. So let me show you how global variables work real quick. So let's uh, let's call this method. Let's pass it 5, right? Let's calculate the factorial of 5, and let's assign the result, that is the returning value of this, to our global variable, like this. Now it will execute this function, and it will return the result which will be stored into this variable. And after returning it, let's call the print Java function. Right, we have called this method, and let's print the value of factorial here. Let's simply print my num. Okay, let's try running our program. So as you can see, uh, we are getting this is Java, and the value of the my num variable, which is a global value. It can be accessed anywhere in the program. So we are first storing the value into this global variable, and then we are calling this function which prints this uh, value. So that's it for today's video. Thank you for watching.